First of all, I'd like to introduce myself. I'm John Sherman. I serve as president of the Edgerton Fire District Board. I'd like to welcome all of you for coming to the meeting. And we got a lot to go over right now, so I'm going to turn this over to Randy right away. Thank you.
So I'm going to go through some acknowledgments and some introductions and kind of coordinate the introductions. About halfway through, the introductions should take us about an hour and a half. So we'll take a break about halfway through. Let me start first. Is Paul up in the booth? Or is he hiding? Paul, do you want to wave? The EPAC has been unbelievably helpful in helping us coordinate this. It's a lot better than the plastic chairs that you would have gotten on the apparatus floor at the fire station. So Paul, thank you very much to you and to the district. The young lady to his right, if we're all looking that direction, Inga Cushman from the City of Milton. Inga is the technology director for Milton. She is coordinating the live streaming. So everything this evening is being live streamed. We have a couple of people, we think, in Florida, right, who are watching us. So for those in Florida, send us some warm weather, would you please? And I really appreciate the help that Inga has been as well. I wanted to acknowledge, where's Don? Where are you, Don? There you are. Don Vruwenk. Don has been more involved than you can even imagine behind the scenes. There are a lot of things that we've had to work through with the Department of Transportation, Department of Development, Department of Tourism, I mean, just a lot of different elements, including the governor's office. And Don has just been unbelievably helpful to us throughout this entire process. There are some things in the works that we would love to talk about tonight that could potentially make things better for us. But you guys know how, however long it takes to get something through local government, multiply that by what, about 5 or 6, and that's, but anyway, I want to acknowledge Don and everything that he has done for us. Chief Whitmore, where did Brandon go? Chief Whitmore and our Edgerton Fire Protection District staff that have helped kind of coordinate this, Captain Frida in the back, one of our paramedics, Tyler, hiding in the corner there. Did I miss anybody else from the staff? So thank you guys very much. The first set of introductions that I would like to do is have our current Edgerton Fire Protection District Board introduce themselves. The way that we kind of describe this, and for those of you that, all of us have talked sort of one-on-one in a lot of cases, right? But this is really the first time we've brought all of you together. We've been using a lot of dating analogies related to this, in terms of the first date and then, taking, the significant other to meet your parents and just all of those kinds of things. Sort of tonight, the way we describe this session, this is all of us coming together and meeting our siblings, right, for the first time. Ruth, my wife and I, we had 3 kids, right? And so especially when Rachel would bring a new boyfriend home, the amount of scrutiny that would go on over that individual and whether or not that individual was, right or wrong for their sister. And then that person would leave, and then those guys, of course, would beat up on their sister. So tonight's kind of like meet our siblings. But the Edgerton board, we'd like to have each of them introduce themselves. I tend to do things alphabetically, it's the only way I can sort of keep it straight. So I'll start out with the town of Albion representative. Okay, thank you. And one of the pictures that you were seeing ahead of time, ask Kate about that at the break, but we'll skip that. City of Edgerton. Town of Fulton. Right. Randy Thompson, I'm serving as the alternate Town of Porter. And for those who don't know, when we talk about the history and the lasting of the intergovernmental agreement that created this district, Dave was one of the founding fathers. And so we rely on him very heavily for a lot of institutional knowledge about how we got here. So thank you, David. Town of Sumner. Thank you, guys. Then what I'd like to do is have the chief elected official of our 5 existing municipalities introduce themselves. So, you can be Bob? All right, why don't you be Bob? Go for it. Abigail, thank you. City of Edgerton, Chris? Thank you, Chris. Carrie is the elder statesman from Fulton, or Scott, or? There you go. That's true. Do you want to introduce yourself, Carrie? That's right. All right, I'm not going to force it. Town of Porter, same exact gentleman. And Sumner. Makes working real easy, right? When, you know, the board members are the chief elected officials. And then the petitioning municipalities. So now I really got to figure this one out. I believe Harmony first, Jeff? Johnstown? Rob, I know Rob's here. Lima? Bill's not here from Koshkon, right? Just make sure I don't want to miss him. City of Milton? And Town of Milton. A couple of special thank yous to add on here. Tolly, where'd Tolly go? Yeah, stand up. Jeff Tollefson and Al Hulick, Jeff from the town of Harmony. Jeff kind of became the de facto staff person for the towns. Tim. What did I say? Jeff? Sorry, never mind. I'll get it right. Tim kind of became the de facto staff person for the towns, running the financials and the numbers and the data and stuff, which we won't kid him about the number of maps that got created, but was instrumental. And then Al Hulick on the City of Milton's side. So, Anissa, please extend our appreciation to Al. Oh, Al, sorry. Should have thrown something at me or something or other. Al Hulick from the City of Milton. I won't share the one story. I think it was 2.5 hours into one of the meetings when we were just dissecting the books beyond belief. And Al just has a priceless comment that at a party sometime in the future I'll share with everybody. But both Al and Tali have been very, very helpful to us. Do we have any of our legal counsels with us tonight? I don't believe so. So we just saved about $2,000. There have been three attorneys that have been working with us on this process. The towns, the petitioning towns, all went together and hired Michael Olerich to represent, sort of coordinate the towns. The City of Milton, their city attorney is Mark Schrader. That's a name that a lot of you will recognize because he also is the Edgerton Fire Protection District attorney. So those of you that understand conflict of interest, we decided, oops, this is going to be a problem. So basically, Mark has recused himself for anything as it relates to the district's involvement in these discussions and is the representative for the City of Milton. And then we reached out and brought in Bill Morgan as the attorney for the district to coordinate the district's part of the discussion. So those three gentlemen, and if you know them, I think most of you really do, they are phenomenal, and they have been more than helpful to us. So they've done a great job with that. And then I want to kind of end the introductions with sort of a very special acknowledgement, thank you, and about 5 or 6 other accolades, if I could come up with them. The Milton Fire Department chief staffs, I know, Chris, you want to stand up? Who else we got? Pony? What else we got from Milton Fire? John? I've known these guys for a long, long time, and what they have done over the last 3 or 4 years, as all of us as municipalities, all of you as municipalities have been trying to figure out how to handle this, right? I think everybody understands the amount of uncertainty and consternation, if you will, maybe fear, another word we could throw in there, that generates within a workforce. And so the work that Chris and Jeremy and Pete and Rob have done over there is just absolutely phenomenal, and I cannot tell you how much the citizens need to appreciate what they have done over the last few years, and so I couldn't not acknowledge that. So with that, we're going to start out with some opening comments by several members of the petitioning municipalities to talk a little bit about how we got at least to the start of this process. And I'm actually going to bring up Brian Meyer first and let Brian start out. Brian, chair of the town of Milton. And like any of these kinds of things that happen, there's a backstory, right? And I know that this had been weighing on him for several months. But one day was it February or March? March, right?
Right around the 1st of March.
Right around the 1st of March. My phone rang, and this gentleman on the other end of the phone introduced himself and said, I'd like to talk to you. So it's only appropriate that we let Brian go first and kind of talk a little bit about this from the petitioning perspective. Brian?
Thank you, Chief. I appreciate it. And the Chief has been great to work with and talk with and brainstorm on concepts that we may or may not resolve in. But just a brief amount about me. I've been town chair for the town of Milton now for 17 years. I hadn't served in public service prior to that at all, so there was a big learning curve for myself in all the respects of municipal governing. I had been on a lot of boards before and private associations and whatnot, but in the political arena, I had a lot to learn. And all of those 17 years, I've served on our fire commission committee. So in the Milton Fire District and the territory we cover, there's 5 municipalities served in that district. The district is currently owned in a 50-50 partnership in every respect, 50-50, by the City of Milton and the town of Milton, and has for several decades. And we provided contract service for a few of the towns, Lima, Harmony, and Johnstown, and for Koshkonong Township as well. And during those 17 years that I've served on commission, and by the way, our fire commission in many, many respects is very similar to the Edgerton Fire Protection District's board and how they oversee and manage a district here. There's different terms we use and different assumptions we have of them, but they are very similar districts in tasks and duties and responsibilities and challenges. And in my 17 years, we've discussed many of the same challenges that you've experienced in the Edgerton district, and many of those challenges have been resolved and satisfied, but we've always talked about some of the other difficult things since we've achieved and continue to achieve, I should say, things like structures and buildings and equipment that we use, that our staff uses in fire protection and EMS and paramedic level services, which, by the way, we have all achieved just recently in the last couple of years. But along with that comes staffing itself and money to run it all and manage it all, and trying to retain those staffing members and retain the ability to serve. So for many, many years, like the Edgerton District, we've discussed the challenges in acquiring staffing, maintaining staffing, and funding them at a reasonable and the expected levels. So we've always talked about how do we accomplish that long term, and we've been talking about a long-term concept for many, many, many years. We've tried many staffing models. We've talked about how we would achieve funding it, and my personal goal, my comments historically have been, let's try to achieve a long-term sustainable model that we can competently fund and promote, and tell everybody that believe that we've found something that is in the best interest of everyone and can be sustained for decades and decades. So I've tried to find the, quote-unquote 50-year model, where instead of just trying things one at a time, and that's not the long-term solution, but we hope to learn from all of these things that we try. So in that, we think that trying to build new facilities and share them in an expanded district and share the resources and have the options to pull resources from multiple facilities within one district that's managed by one level of management, and then ask the taxpayers to fund this model because we believe it's sustainable and is something similar to a 50-year plan concept. So that's what brought us to this discussion the last year. The Edgerton Fire Protection District Board has invested a lot of effort and time in discussing this, and we've all been trying to identify how we can benefit from this option of service. I'm going to quit there because you're going to hear a lot of stuff tonight. So thank you. And I think the mayor, Anissa, would like to speak.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I don't need needs no introduction, right?
Well, it's a big night when the mayor puts her heels on and gets the gray taken out of her hair for something. And I'd like to blame all my gray hair on having been mayor for the City of Milton, but I'm pretty sure it's from raising my kids through the years, and it's been there quite a while. I really want to thank all of you in the community that came out tonight to hear all of the speakers in the presentation. I want to thank the elected officials that are here and all the fire and the EMS staff. I really appreciate this opportunity. We all do. Edgerton Fire Protection District and their townships, the City of Milton and all of our townships have been working really hard to get to this moment, and we're excited to share the history and what the future may look like for all of us. I've been the mayor of the City of Milton, going on my 4th term, and I've been an elected official since 2011. I'm going to briefly summarize the path Milton took that brought us here tonight, the challenges and the support we have for the service design that's being shared tonight. I've lived in Rock County my entire life, and I've also been employed at Rock County Human Services for the past 29 years, and I'm a juvenile probation officer, and I continue to work for Rock County full-time. I've raised my 3 kids in the Milton schools. They are all now grown up. My daughter is a nurse at UW. My oldest son is a Phi Ed teacher and a football coach at the Milton High School. And my youngest son served several years in the Marines and is currently attending UW Stout. He plans on returning to Milton and working in the environmental sciences area. We have very strong ties to the Milton area, and we have lived in the Milton area for 30 years. And Milton has done very well by my family. Some of you may have even had them in 4-H. For as long as I've been representing the community of Milton, fire and EMS, staffing and service delivery models have been studied and discussed. So over a decade. When I was thinking about fire and EMS and about tonight's meeting, and I'm someone that likes to chew things over in my mind till all the flavor is gone, and then I chew it a little bit more. I was trying to remember how many times my family had needed an ambulance or used public safety services. I have more years behind me than ahead of me, so it took a little bit. And at first, I was thinking, yeah, gosh, I don't know that we've, used fire and EMS that much in my family. Then I remembered when I got the call. My daughter, who was in middle school, had been a passenger in a vehicle that was in a severe car accident. And she was injured and had to be taken by ambulance to the hospital. And I remembered the call that I got when I was working late at the Rock County Courthouse, saying my oldest son was seriously injured while playing a football game at the high school, and he was now being taken by ambulance to the hospital. And then I remembered the time I got the call that my father, who was battling cancer, was not doing well, and he needed to be taken to ambulance to UW. He was so proud to tell me that it was Milton staff that had transported him to the UW hospital. Several months later, when my father died, the Milton Fire EMS staff sent my family a plant. And it meant the world to me, and it meant the world to my family. And that's the great staff that we all have working in fire and EMS. That's who they are, and they want to take care of our families in their time of need. During those moments over the years, when I was receiving those horrific calls, that a mother or a daughter or a father or a son never wants to get, it never once crossed my mind that there would be a time, then or now, when my loved ones desperately needed emergency services, that an ambulance would not arrive quickly and tend to their needs. But for some rural areas in Rock County and in rural areas throughout the state of Wisconsin, mothers and fathers, sons and daughters are making calls for their loved ones that need emergency medical attention. And an ambulance is not able to arrive quickly. And in some instances, the ambulance doesn't arrive at all. And this is due to all of our concerns over staffing problems. We are grateful that in the City of Milton and the City of Edgerton and all the townships that are covered by all of our fire and EMS, that that's not happening here. But we don't ever want that to happen to our communities. As I previously mentioned, Milton has put considerable time, effort, and money in studying fire and EMS over the years. And Brian did a really nice job of outlining that too. In 2007, 2008, 2015, and in 2021, task forces were created along with staff and/or studies were undertaken. The theme connecting that thread through all of the task forces and studies across the decades was the ongoing recommendations around increased staffing, staffing model changes, full-time career staffing initiatives, increasing our investment levels that are dedicated to fire and EMS, and the unsustainability of the volunteer model. It has been a gift to all of us over many, many years, and actually all of our lives, that volunteers have anchored our fire and EMS models and our services. It has saved us millions and millions of dollars over the years. And we owe a debt of gratitude to all of those volunteers. We spend $1 million alone every year on our police department. I have 3 pages here in this binder of details of all of the studies, all of the recommendations, and all of the solutions that we have put in place over the years to address the challenges that all of the jurisdictions face today around staffing. And none of them were quite able to meet the need. And we continue to try, and we're continuing to be hopeful. In 2021, the City of Milton and the Town of Milton both recognized the urgent need to explore any and all options that might be available to either of us. Wisconsin Public Policy Forum completed an analysis of service delivery models for Milton that included the prospect of unilateral consolidation with the City of Janesville, a standalone Milton model, and a regional model. It also looked at equitable cost allocations methodologies. Wisconsin Policy Forum has done similar analysis all across the state for communities. We asked our elected officials to remain open-minded to all opportunities and options that were shared, and any that might come about in the future that we hadn't deliberated yet. We had multiple discussions with Janesville, and some of those discussions included the Town of Milton. We were then presented the Edgerton regional model that the towns had been discussing over the months. And we appreciate all those efforts that were ongoing. We dedicated ourselves to further investigating the opportunities and the challenges with this model. So we have been spending endless hours in 2021 and 2022 meeting and seriously contemplating the future of our fire and EMS services. The City of Milton and the Townships of Milton, Johnstown, Lima, and Harmony unanimously voted in 2021 to enter into an intergovernmental agreement with each other and to move a petition forward to join the Edgerton Fire Protection District. We recognize we are asking for an increased commitment to investing dollars in fire and EMS service delivery that has not been required over the years when a volunteer model was primarily supporting our services. Milton will be going to a referendum for these investment dollars to create a service delivery model that is required to sustain staffing and operations and meet the ever-increasing needs of our community. We are aware that innovative leadership, a spirit of open-mindedness, and a collaboration is demanded of all of us. I believe it's important that all of you receive a straight assessment of the seriousness of the environment we find ourselves in and the opportunities that have been created to navigate to a sustainable solution for the years ahead. I'm confident in, and I wholeheartedly support, a regional model. We oftentimes don't think about regional models in public safety, and we can look to some for examples. The Rock County Sheriff's Office in the Rock County Emergency Management comes to mind as approaches that have been functioning for decades. All we can ever do is play the hand we're dealt. We might not get all 4 queens for you sheep's head players out there, or both bowers for the euchre players. But oftentimes we win. That hand, when we work collaboratively with our partner or partners that have the other queen or the left bower. In the end, we will all be ancestors someday. As a community, all we can do is hope to build something better for the people we love who carry on after us. We build a foundation that will withstand time for the children yet to be born, who will be loved by the people we will never meet. I want to thank you for coming out tonight, and I encourage you to listen to the presentations carefully and ask questions. Thank you very much for your time and attention.
So I also realize I gotta hopefully bring that back alive. Jeff Clens, the town chairman from the town of Harmony. I'll introduce Jeff, and we got to know each other pretty well when we went through this. He is former law enforcement, understands public safety probably better than a lot of people, and it's been a lot of fun. So Jeff.
Thank you. Good evening. As the chief says, I'm Jeff Clens, the town chairman for the town of Harmony. I've got over 30 years of law enforcement in Rock County. I worked for this town of Beloit, City of Beloit, and eventually the Rock County Sheriff's Department, where I retired from in 2011. During that period of time in law enforcement, you have to understand that fire departments and law enforcement personnel have a rivalry. You know, it's a friendly battle, but I mean, it always happened. We would respond to a car accident on the road. We would get everything going good before the fire department arrived. We would have traffic going smoothly, and then the fire department shows up and they park their rigs wherever they want to, and it basically just causes problems for the scene. But I have to say that since this problem with the fire department, at least for Harmony Township, and I think I can say as well for Johnstown and Lima, I've gained a new respect for the fire agencies. They do a lot for our communities, and they're important. They're something that we need to put them up on a pedestal, because they really work hard and save our lives in many cases. I just recently had a friend that was killed in a motorcycle, but I know that during the period, motorcycle accident, and during the period that the fire department was there, I'm sure he received the best care that he possibly could. I'm fairly new in the municipal government. I've been on the board, I guess, for about, 7 or 8 years. This is my second term as town chairman, and I kind of expected it to be a fairly easy part-time job. And then in the summer of 2020, I started hearing inklings that the fire department, which Harmony was contracted with the Milton Township and the City of Milton Fire Department. And I started hearing that there was some problems with staffing and, just some other things that they were having trouble with. And then I think it was in January of 2021, I heard that we might be losing our fire department, that there was some problems with them and they might be going away. And by state law, townships are required to provide fire and EMS service. So I got my board to start looking into this. We looked at several different options, like starting our own fire department. Well, that's nuts, that's crazy. That would have been stupid of us to even try that. We looked into going to the city of Janesville. Now, you have to understand as well, in municipal governments, townships don't get along with cities, most generally, especially when you have a city that can end up annexing a lot of your property and you lose your tax base and so on. So I really was kind of hesitant about going with the city of Janesville. But they did say that they could cover all of Harmony Township. They advised me that to do that, they would have to build a new fire department. They would have to equip it with all new equipment, and then they would have to hire full-time firefighters for that fire department. And the nice thing, Harmony Township would have to pay for all of that. We kind of figured, Tully, my town clerk, who's been excellent in this, we kind of figured it was going to be probably $1.5 million a year. You have to understand that in 2020, we paid what, $125,000 total for our fire department, or for our contract with the Milton Township and City Township Fire, or City Fire. So here as a new chairman, I'm thinking, what the hell am I going to do? We're talking $1 million probably, going from 125 to $1 million in just a couple of years. People were going to be pissed. And I had to figure out a way to handle this. So after talking with Janesville, I reached out to Brian Meyer, who had informed me that he was talking with the Edgerton Fire District in regards to maybe joining them. And we talked, and I decided that it was a good idea. Maybe we better check this out. So I contacted Randy, the fire chief, and we spoke, and man, it sounded pretty good. So from that point on, my supervisors and Tully, we started looking into it. We had our whole office covered with different response times maps. We checked everything out in regards to how long it would take them to get there, what it would cost, and things like that. And we didn't have the expertise like the City of Milton and the Town of Milton did, where they hired companies to look into that. We, as a board, checked it out ourselves. And I mean, it was a lot of work, but it was very, very interesting. And that's where I started to get respect for the fire department as a law enforcement officer. Anyways, after having all of these maps and having 911 Center give us all the response calls and stuff like that, I found out a couple of things that were very interesting. We were paying the city of Janesville to cover 20% of our township. We were paying them a lot of money, thousands and thousands of dollars. But I found out that almost half of the time when a fire or EMS call would come in, the city of Janesville wasn't responding because their department was busy with something else. So we would end up with Milton Township, City of Milton Fire Department responding to our calls. So I'm thinking, well, why are we paying these people? And then another issue came up in our time studies. we found that the average time for the city of Janesville to respond to a call in Harmony Township was 9.75 minutes. And here all of this time that we were digging into this, everybody was telling us a 5-minute response times is what is probably the best that you can get. But again, we're paying thousands of dollars for 9.75 minutes of response time, and half of the time, they're not responding. So after looking at everything, with all these maps on the walls, all the time schedules and everything else, our board decided that this might be the best option that we would have to join with the Edgerton Fire Protection Service. Now, you guys have been nice enough to at least give us a chance to talk to you and bring up this idea. And through many, many hours of work and meetings, I believe that this is a possibility that's going to really help all of our residents. It's going to save money not just for Harmony Township and Johnstown and Milton and Lima. It's going to also help you guys in your communities. So I appreciate the fact that you've given us this opportunity. I hope we can continue and come up with an excellent fire service for everybody that will last 50 years or more, well beyond when I'm around. So again, thank you very much. Oh, and I think one thing too that the last thing that I'm going to say is I would also like to thank all of the citizens, not just in Harmony, but every one of these townships and municipalities for taking the time to listen to us and giving us the opportunity to work on this, to come up with a good plan. Thank you very much.
So give me a second here while I kind of bend over and bring this back up. We're going to take kind of the low-key approach, and I was just going to do it from down on the carpet, but it does sort of make more sense to do it from here. So. I want to talk a little bit about multiple issues that we're wrestling with right now. And it is not just the Edgerton Fire Protection District. The Milton Fire Commission are wrestling with the same issues. So is just about every other municipality and board around the state. But the key point that I need to bring up is that the salary issues that we are wrestling with right now, there's a salary disparity. Some people sat through a 2.5-hour meeting yesterday working on that one. We as a department have a building that is about 4 years past its usable life. It was a 25-year building and we're going on 29 years with it. So we have known for a long time that we need to do something with our building. And then obviously there is the petition for membership. The key point to be made is that they're all independent issues, that they're not caused by each other. The salary disparity, and we could talk for hours, not going to do that, about how the emergency services has gotten into this problem with the salary disparities, and basically what's happening is we're just all stealing from each other. If I had the chief from a couple of the metropolitan departments here in Rock County up standing here with me, they would tell you their biggest problem is that they're getting picked by the city of Madison, the city of Green Bay, the city of Racine, city of Brookfield, right? They're getting staff stolen away from them. Well, guess what? Once that staff goes away, right, to those cities, then the Janesvilles and the Beloits of the world are like, well, Edgerton's got a lot of really good, highly trained people. Milton's got a lot of really good, highly trained people. We'll just offer them, right? And so basically this is just a chain of events that's happening. Has nothing to do with the petition, with what we're talking about in terms of doing a regional approach to anything. It's just basically a literally non-existent labor pool. There were 3 what I would call moderate-size communities in central Wisconsin that over the last month were advertising for very well-paid, highly paid, fully union positions. The 3 departments, 0 applicants. Not a single person in any of those communities even applied. So the whole issue of salary disparity, really what we're trying to get to is salary parity, right? So that we aren't creating this situation where we invest in some young people, we get really good people, and then literally the day after they graduate, they are looking for a job somewhere else, right? And that is the situation that we find ourselves in. Edgerton especially, I won't speak for the others, but I can guarantee you that it's the same as true everywhere. That is totally independent of what we're talking about in relation to the petition, right? That would exist whether we are just the City of Edgerton Fire Department itself, whether we're the district with the 5 communities we've got, or we're a bigger district than that. So that's independent. The second thing, the building is what the building is, right? It is 29 years old. I'm looking right at Chris, right? You were probably there for the ribbon cutting, right? And John, sorry. Yeah. The building needs a lot of work, and we've done a really good job of trying to use it for as long as we can use it, but we're at that point where we got to do something about it, and it has been in our capital plan for the last 5 or 6 years. The fact that that is now also coming up for discussion, again, has absolutely nothing to do with the salary issue above it or the potential larger district issue below it. It's a building that needs to be addressed. The only reason I'm even wasting 5 minutes of your time on it is please don't try to link them together, right? I mean, they all have costs, right? And I realize that, and when we get into the discussions, we're discussing them literally all at the same time right now, but they really are just sort of all happening right now together. They are not linked in any way, other than there are some discussions, and if you've read through the staff report, there is some savings that could present itself if we do this right, that could help us offset some of the incremental costs of those top 2. We've got to figure that out, right? But there is a potential that there is some savings there, and so there is some linkage in that respect that looking at an integration of a larger district might help us a little bit offset some of the costs, but it doesn't make them go away. So enough beating a dead horse, but that's just one that we got to be very careful of that we're not trying to make links on. Before I get to the staff report itself, and we are going to take a break, but before I get to the staff report, there was a handout that we gave you as you walked in the door. I am not going to spend much time at all on the front side of it, which is just a little background on myself. Most of you do know me. I literally grew up here. I kind of chuckle with Rob all the time. My family and members of my family still farm in Johnstown Township, and they do very well, right? They have a very prosperous farm. We've got kind of deep roots, both on the maternal side and the parental side. I think my relatives moved to the area in the mid-1800s. And Ruthie and I have even been able to find the land where the original farm existed. No buildings left, but the land is still there. Most people who know me have no idea that the fire service isn't my full-time job. I worked 40-plus years in business and industry, a multinational corporation. I retired as a regional vice president. 95% of the people who knew me never knew I had a different job other than being a fire chief, which is okay. I'm actually kind of happy about that. But the reason I bring it up, the corporation that I worked for was a corporation that went through mergers, acquisitions, sell-offs, spin-offs, divestitures. Over the 40 years I was there, we did everything corporately in terms of growing, shrinking, dividing, spinning off that you can imagine. We did some of them very well. We did some of them terribly poorly. That's part of the expertise that I kind of bring along. I've gone through mergers of things and acquisitions and all sorts, any acronym you want to come up with. And I can tell you I've watched some that were very, very successful, and I watched some that were just absolute miserable failures. And those are good lessons as well, right? Because it teaches you what not to do. I share that with you. And then on the fire side, 45 years in the fire service, fire and EMS. A couple of members in the audience can appreciate this comment. My original EMT license was a 4-digit number. So, it was a long, long time ago. I've been very involved across the state and across the country for a couple of different reasons. I actually am one of the co-authors of the original 911 legislation in the state of Wisconsin in 1983, I believe. So I've also had a lot of opportunity to work with government. I am a very simple person in reality. Most of the staff that works for me goes, you're really complicated, dude. I'm actually very simple. I have a couple of very absolute core beliefs. One of those is if you're going to do something, do it right, or don't do it, right? Be honest with yourself that if you can't figure out how to do it right, then just don't do it. Because the consequences of just doing it sort of half, and I won't finish that sentence, really lead to then decades of problems afterwards. So one of the things that the municipalities, as the petitioners, I think learned really early on when we were talking was I was a lot more focused on if you're going to bring a petition forward, you better figure out how to bring one forward that is the right kind of petition, that is the right kind of fire service, that is the right kind of EMS service for your citizens. Because if you bring something forward that, again, is half something or other, I gotta remember, we are streaming this, right? So I gotta be careful, right? First of all, I'm not even gonna bring it forward for you, right? You're gonna be on your own, right? And what I can tell you is that the petitioning municipalities took that to heart, whether they wanted to or not, and have brought forward a very, very well done petition in that respect. The challenge of tonight, as it says up here on the screen, is that the petitioning municipalities and the boards, all of the boards, have been knee-deep in this for 13 months, and they have been deeply invested in how to get it right and how to put together a petition that was going to be what it is. The challenge tonight, I have our 5 existing municipalities here. We've been trying to keep you apprised, right, of we're going through this, we're talking, these things going on, right? But the level of detail that the petitioning municipalities have gone through over the last 13 months is quantum compared to what you're now being exposed to. Not going to expect that everybody's going to walk out of here tonight with everything, but we want to touch on the highlights of what's in that petition. The last opening comment is a little bit what I call the evolution of the fire service. There's, I think it's 800, well, you can add the numbers up, 800 and some odd fire departments across the state of Wisconsin. 650 of those are fully volunteer. 123 of those are combination, meaning they have some number of career staff, full-time employees, and some number of volunteer, but paid on call, right? I mean, we use paid on call and volunteer simultaneously. They're not doing it for free, but they're only being paid on a particular call. Out of those 800 plus departments across the state of Wisconsin, only 91 of them are fully career. It's a small number. Municipalities move from the left side of that chart to the right side of that chart. My favorite is Keenan. Anybody's ever been in Keenan, Wisconsin? It's probably true, right? You wouldn't even know you were in Keenan. You also, as you're driving through Keenan, wouldn't even know that if you pulled off on a little dirt back road, there's a one-door metal shed. That's the Keenan Fire Department. They have 23 calls a year. So whether you're Keenan or you're the city of Milwaukee, how do you get there? Right? one of the key things about this chart is that time just keeps moving, right? Your communities grow, the hazards within your communities continue to get more complex. If you just stick with the fire department and EMS service that you had 30 years ago, and now you find yourself 30 years later, you're in deep trouble, right? And digging yourself out of that hole is going to be unbelievably expensive. The key point is, and this is a very strong compliment to the Edgerton Fire Protection District Board and all of our existing communities, over the last 5 years, we have continued to try to move across that continuum, tried to stay up with. When I first came, we had a very small full-time staff, one person on the ambulance, and we had to wait for a volunteer to come in to get the ambulance out the door. Right? And we got to full staff on the ambulance, so the ambulance could go out the door 24 hours a day. We went to paramedic level service. We've done a whole bunch of other stuff. But the key point is you've just got to constantly be moving along this continuum. People will talk about volunteerism is dead. It's challenging, right? Because the demands on our time are more and more and more. But it's not really dead. There are a lot of people in our communities that genuinely are willing to help. But the reality is, so when I first started in the fire side of things in 1980, our department averaged about 2 calls a week. I had a very community-minded employer that would allow me to leave if one of those calls happened during the day. And Ruthie will attest to this. I used to reserve about 10 days of my vacation a year, and my employer was okay with this. I just reserve about 10 days of vacation because I never knew when we were going to be up all night and the fire was going to be going still the next morning, right? And so I always kept about 10 days of vacation, where about 10 days a year I'd end up having to be gone from work during the whole course of the day. They'd let me go, hour here, hour there. But that's maybe once every other week, right? Because the other calls are at night when it doesn't affect, right? But when you get to the point, the Edgerton Fire Protection District right now today averages between 3 and 4 calls a day, every day. There are no employers out there, or if you know of any, call me. We want them in our community. There are no employer out there that's going to let their employees go, just run out the door 3 or 4 times a day. And quite honestly, there's anybody that's happily married. I keep looking at my wife. She's an absolute saint over this, right? But the number of times she's gotten left in a restaurant, just by herself. People who don't know us always think we don't like each other because we go everywhere in 2 cars. Because I'll just run out the door, right? So if she wants to get home, she better have brought a car with her. That kind of demand on our paid-on-call and volunteer times is what causes us to move along this continuum. Because when you're at 1,500 calls a year, right, there's just, people can't do that from a volunteer side. So you've got to start augmenting it with career staff. And then eventually you get far enough across that line or across that continuum where you probably end up with all career staff. So that's the point that's being made up here. We're on a continuum. It is constantly changing. So with that, how am I doing? It's right at 7 o'clock. You want to go about 15 minutes more, and then we take a break? Is that good? So Inga, we're going to switch over to the actual staff report, actually the timeline. The opening speakers did a great job of kind of chronicling the events that occurred. It has been a journey, and it's one that there's been a tremendous amount of involvement in. Not going to go through it. You can read it. You can kind of see the journey we've been on. But I wanted to drop down to where we are and what comes next. So April 28th of 22, we've gotten to the point where the district board has dissected that petition in great detail. We won't talk about one meeting where we were even down to individual words. But But the board has looked at that petition, looked at it, and there's a staff report. That's what we're going to go through here. And the staff report looked at operationally, does this make sense? Financially, does this make sense? And then from a governance perspective, can we figure out how to govern something that's this big and potentially getting even bigger? The conclusion that the board came to was that there's some merit here. This looks like this has some operational value. It looks like it has some financial value. We got to figure out the governance piece, but it is at least worth moving forward, looking at it to see if we can actually figure it out. So what will happen next, we'll actually bring the three attorneys together first, and we're going to let them come up with sort of a draft of what a new potential intergovernmental agreement would look like. There is a huge asterisk next to that point. And I think it was Brian. He and I were talking one day about how long is it going to take for the Edgerton Fire Protection District to, I think the question was to make a proposal or something along those lines. Because, it was about 6 months into the discussions with another municipality. And I said, it's about 5 minutes. Because all I need to do is go out to the car, get my laptop, and I can bring up the current intergovernmental agreement between the 5 municipalities. That's going to be the model. Our district has operated under that existing IGA, which covers operational issues, financial, governance, and everything else, right? We've operated under that document for 30 years. And the municipalities, we think, I'm not trying to put words in anybody's mouth, but it's worked pretty well. So, when Brian asked me that question about how hard is it going to be to come up with an IGA that would potentially cover a much bigger institution, it's like, 5 minutes, right? We probably got to add some names in it. We probably got to figure out a new calculation around equalized value, right? Just, a couple of things, but it's not going to be that hard. And that was the premise that the petitioning municipalities worked under from the very beginning, was they either needed to accept the language in the existing IGA or probably don't bother putting in a petition. Now, it isn't quite that simple, right? I mean, because it's a complicated document. We got to go through and we got to make sure we got it right. But for the most part, this step shouldn't take very long because the attorneys will sit down, they'll just kind of look at it, come up with a draft. We're suggesting we have the attorneys do that work for us first instead of coming out to all 10 of the municipalities and saying, hey guys, let's all sit down at a table and write an IGA together, right? You can imagine what that conversation would look like, right? Let's let the attorneys go through the hard job, put together a draft, which then leads to that draft document, after approved by the board as a draft, would then come out to all 10 of the municipalities and say, okay, here it is. These are the tweaks. It'll be in red line form, right? So you can see clearly what's changing. And here's our proposal. At that point, yet to be determined how we bring all 10 municipalities back together and go, did we get it right? Did we get something wrong, right? We've got to tweak this, we've got to tweak that. But that's kind of the concept. That's really where we're at in terms of what comes next. Once we would get to a point where everybody reasonably is comfortable with that new IGA, then it would come back to all 10 municipalities because all 10 of you, the 5 existing and the 5 potential new, would all have to agree to it, right? Because you are legal signatories to that IGA. Then we'd work on a transition plan, which, again, we'll work on that in the background anyway, right? But that's really the process. I'll hold for 2 seconds. Any questions about that as a process before we actually get into the staff report? So with that, we are not reading the whole thing. the existing IGA had language in it about entertaining new attachments to the district or detachments. It has both in there. And that process was well laid out in the existing IGA. Now, I've got to believe, and David, I won't put you on the spot, but my guess is it was probably written assuming that somebody might want us to pick up an extra square mile over here or maybe a couple of square miles over there. And that was probably the intent. I don't think anybody thought 30 years ago that we'd be looking at adding 110 square miles to it, but the process of how to do this is defined in that IGA, and we have just been basically following that process to the letter from the very beginning. So that's really what that says. A key word in the document talks about soundness. It's a direct quote out of the document. Assess the soundness of the fire protection. We took that and kind of expanded it. And we said we got to look at the operational soundness of this, we got to look at the financial soundness of this, and then we got to look at the governance soundness of it. We put in there a little bit of history, because my guess is maybe 40 years from now, somebody's going to pick up this document and go, whoa, what did those guys do 40 years ago? Why did they do this? Why are we where we are, right? So we put some historical references in there about what we're all facing right now. And I don't need to read them to you. You know them as well as I do in terms of the impacts of Act 10, the decline, if you will, of volunteerism, or at least the struggles of finding enough time to be able to volunteer. COVID-19 we are still dealing with it. We literally had someone today that now has a COVID exposure. It is not gone. It is something that our crews, and I commend our paramedic and our ambulance crews, we treat every call, literally every call, as a COVID positive, and we're still dealing with it. But what that has done is it has just decimated the labor pool. I don't know how else to say it, and this goes back to kind of that salary discussion we had earlier. Literally, when 3 medium-sized, well-funded departments in this state try to hire somebody and all 3 of them can't get a single applicant, the labor pool is decimated. I make a comment in the report, and I truly mean this. I have said this to David. I've said it to Evan and the other people that remember the history. The intergovernmental agreement that exists today is unbelievably fortuitous in terms of setting up for what we're going through right now. And so it's an amazing framework that just basically says we don't have to start over, right? All we're trying to do is tweak it a little bit. There's a background in there. The opening speakers talked to you about the department that exists today, jointly owned by the city and the township, and then the contracted for service. I mention it.
City of Evansville, all EMTs, Evansville first responders, and Edgerton ambulance.
So if you didn't pick up the significance of that, one of our neighboring communities is calling us for mutual aid because they don't have an ambulance available. Now, that wasn't meant to be negative. Their current ambulance may be out on another call, right? But it's just, that's kind of the way this whole system is working right now. I want to comment a little bit on the town of Koshkonong. Bill Burlingame and I went to school together a long time ago. Bill is the chairperson for the town of Koshkonong. When we sat down and we were talking with Harmony, Johnstown, Koshkonong, and Lima, Bill's kind of like, Randy, it's 37 houses. Is that right, Chris? It's a couple of streets, 30 houses. He's like, I'll just be a contractor, right? I don't need a seat at the board. I don't need you to go through and figure out how to, define an entire IGA around me and my 30 houses. So the core group has been the Miltons and then Harmony, Lima, and Johnstown from the very beginning. Bill has stayed engaged in this, but he said from the very beginning, when you guys get it all figured out, call me. I'll contract for our 37 houses. So that's the story about Koshkonong, and that's what's made reference in there. Brian talked a little bit about the size, so I'm going to skip over that. The procedure to address petition for membership in the district. This entire section and the steps that are laid out there, these are directly from the existing IGA. So I go back to the point, the process that the petitioners followed was defined in the IGA, and they have done a very respectful job in doing that. It was reviewed multiple times by our legal counsel. I think I'm required to say that, every 30 minutes, right? And it talked about all the things. It talks about all the things that the petitioners were required to do in filing the petition. One of the things we did along the way was then sit down with, and this is where all of a sudden all the town boards from Harmony and Lima and Johnstown and Milton and City of got very deeply involved in this. We went through these in great detail with them and said, here's what you have to address in the petition. And oh, by the way, we gave them some guidance on how to do it right? And go back to my point about you could have handled these in about 2 pages, right, and submitted the petition, right, and we'd have just gone, yeah, no, go away. So they spent a lot of time working on the aspects that went into that petition. So the first thing that the staff report does is it goes through their petition paragraph by paragraph by paragraph and says, did they include everything that we told the petitioners they needed to include for us to consider it? And so there's probably 5 or 6 pages here of assessment of literally every paragraph in the petition. We'll get to the punchline at the end. But table 1, just so you kind of get a perspective on it, the petitioning municipalities, we're looking at 110.44 square miles of additional coverage, about 12,400, almost 12,500 people, and an equalized value of $1.2 billion. To put that in perspective, the current Edgerton Fire Protection District is 100 square miles, so 100 basically doubles, right, goes to 210. We currently, and I look at Ramona here, we all struggle with trying to figure out what our population is, right? Every year we try to pull those numbers and figure out what our population is, but we're about 12,500, roughly, somewhere in that range. So basically we're going to double in population, a little more than double in square miles, and we are just a little bit more than $1.2 billion in equalized value today. We're just slightly larger than that. So basically, we are doubling in every way possible. We will protect 210 square miles, potentially. The shock collar just went off on my ankle. We will potentially be protecting 210 square miles, population just shy of 25,000 people, with an equalized value of roughly $2.5 billion. So you wonder why I emphasize let's get this right? Because this matters. Right? This is a big deal. It then continues to go through paragraph by paragraph. I stopped here on the financial one just to draw some attention to this. All three of these clauses that are in the petition were because this is what we laid out and said this has got to be in there. Number 1, the actual financial management of operating and capital levies of the current district municipalities and the new municipalities shall be managed independently for a period of years until it is agreed by the board to integrate the operating and capital budgets as one. That is very important to all of you, because what we are trying to make sure is that by bringing these different organizations that have different mixes of billing revenue, levy revenue, right? There's just a different mix between the two entities. If we just threw them all into one, there would be a ton of cross-subsidization. And, you know, I could just make up wild examples, right? But I assume, Catherine, town of Albion is not going to be interested, no offense, Rob, in subsidizing Johnstown's, right? So to make sure that we absolutely firewall this, a term I've used, I think, from the very beginning, right? We said to the petitioning municipalities, your levy and your capital assessments will be managed independent of the existing district for an undefined, there was a lot of debate about, do we put a specific year, you know, number of years in there, and the answer was no. Eventually, we'll get them so that they line up and that there is no cross-subsidy, and then we can just bring them all into one, because that'll make our accountant, well, it'll cut our accounting bill in half, right? But until we get to that point, they're going to be managed separately, right? Because there's nobody is going to buy into this if there's cross-subsidy. You know, if somebody gets an unfair advantage and somebody else got to pay for it. That's in there. The Edgerton Fire Protection District has been a fee-for-service district since day one. Milton is also, but uses kind of a different approach to it. Is that kind of a fair way to say that, Chris? And so we wanted the petitioning municipalities, not because the petitioning municipalities necessarily care, but when they start getting calls from their citizens about, hey, wait a minute, why did I get a bill for this, right? We didn't want that to be a surprise. And all of the all the petitioning municipalities are well aware of that. And then several of our municipalities take advantage of the CPI +2 exemption that exists within state statute, but it requires all the municipalities in the district to pass the resolution. Some of you guys know this, right? We live it every year. But we didn't want that to be a debatable point with the petitioning municipalities. So they were required in the petition to commit that they would pass the CPI +2 resolution every year. Doesn't mean anybody's got to use it, but everybody's got to pass it, otherwise nobody can use it. So I point those out just to say that that was in the petition. We'll get into some drawings a little bit later, but I think one of the most entertaining questions, and I'm trying to remember if it was, I think it was more Brian than anybody else, or maybe it was Harmony. We were at a public meeting someplace, somebody down, not in Johnstown or Lima, but I think it was Harmony, and the person goes, well, what the heck's the response time going to be to my farm from a fire station in downtown Edgerton? We're like, oops, we probably didn't convey this well enough, right? No, we're not, joining the Edgerton Fire Protection District doesn't mean your fire trucks and your ambulance are going to all come out of Edgerton, right? There was a tremendous amount of work done, and we'll get into it in a few minutes, on how to lay this out. But the petitioners in their petition are bringing forward 2 new facilities that are strategically located with a ton of research to make sure we got them right. But there'll be 2 additional, the potential of a 3rd. But then the other point, and this is where I think Al and I, actually Al did all the hard lifting on this one. We just said, hey, you got to figure this one out. Right now today, if we signed a contract to build a new fire station, if we did it right now tonight, it'd be 2 years, right? Supply chains are just broke. Raw materials are non-existent. 2x4s are $7.84 a 2x4. We realized that the new facilities would not be ready for any kind of consolidated operation. And so the agreement that's been worked out, and is part of the petition, that the owners of the existing building will make that building available to the Edgerton Fire Protection District at no cost for as long as we need it to continue operations in the interim until the new buildings come online. It's a lot more complicated than that, but I think that's basically the summary, right? So we've tried to address those aspects. Last point, and then we'll take our break. So the bottom line on operational soundness says the staff finds that procedurally, the petitioning municipalities have included all the items identified by the district in their petition, as well as additional information above and beyond what was requested, which they did, that is helpful in understanding the nature of the commitments being made by the petitioners. So basically, we're finding the petition is sound. It addressed everything we asked them to address, and it did it in a very impressive way. And you have a copy of the petition in one of your tabs. So with that, it is 7:22. Not wanting to be here longer than Two Brothers serves tonight. Let's take about a 5 or a 7 minute break. Try to be back. If you start coming back in about 7:30, we'll get going about 7:33 or something like that. There are cookies. There's water out in the lobby. Again, cannot be brought back into the facility, but there are out in the lobby. So we'll go ahead and get started again. I realized last night I set this all up with the page numbers so I could actually tell you which page I'm on at any given point in time, and then I haven't been using that, so I will try to do better. This is at the bottom of page 8 in the staff report, the operational soundness. Items 1 and 2 at the bottom of page 8 are probably two of the most important pieces in this document, and number 2 had a lot of weight with it. Item number 1, will the addition of the petitioners with the commitments being made in the petition allow the district to provide sound fire and EMS protection to the petitioners? That's half of it. But to our existing municipalities, the second half is equally as important. Will the addition of the petitioners raise any concerns for the district's ability to continue to provide sound fire protection and EMS services for the municipalities currently being served? Right? So this has got to be a win-win, right? It's got to be good for the 5, 6 joining municipalities, and it's got to be good or better for our current municipalities. At the top of page 9, we talk about, in order to answer the question, like whether this is good or bad, there are 3 aspects of operational soundness that need to be assessed: response time and depth, facilities, apparatus, and equipment, and personnel. And again, I'm not going to read everything that's in here. You guys can, read it. We'll take questions later. But those are the things we looked at. Response times across 210 square miles, the depth of the response, and why depth is important, that's in the text. I'm not going to explain it. Facilities and personnel. So when we started this evaluation with the petitioners, we started with what is called a collision point map. And it basically is a map that we take all the existing fire stations, or if you're going to add one, then you do it with that one too, right? And whatever the number of stations are, you take them all, and you basically say if a ambulance or a fire engine leaves the Edgerton station and leaves the Fort Atkinson station traveling the same route, where are they going to hit head on? Not suggested, Sabrina, okay? Right, just for point of reference, right? And then you take Edgerton and Whitewater, and Delavan and Milton, and Darien, and Janesville Station 2, right? I mean, all the stations, and you basically figure out where they're going to hit each other. And what that ends up doing, obviously, is it draws you a map that says, okay, here's the area that you can reasonably cover depending on where it's coming from. We knew, obviously, that we needed to add stations in Milton, so the first collision map was based on the current Milton station. Then we took and we redid it, and we put what is now kind of referred to as Milton East. We knew where Milton East was going to go, or at least reasonably where it was going to go. We redid the maps. What kind of area are we covering? Then eventually, when the City of Milton came into the discussion and we started talking about Milton West, we redid it, right? So that's what a collision map is. So that's just kind of where we started. I think I jumped now to page 11. There's another collision map on page 10. It's just more of the same. But on page 11, then the next part of the assessment was, where are all the existing calls? Where is the demand for service today? So as would likely be expected, there's a pretty significant demand for service inside the city of Edgerton. There's a pretty significant demand for service inside the city of Milton. And then, except for Rob and my favorite, Johnstown Center, right? You have all the other calls that happens around. What you're looking for is density, right? Number of calls in a given area, because one of the hardest decisions to make as a public official or as a fire chief making a recommendation is how many calls in a given area does it take before it is worth putting a station there and getting it within a 5-minute response time. And, you know, again, I'm kind of picking on Rob a little bit. We talked a lot about Johnstown. I mean, it makes sense to get a station down there, but for 12 calls a year, right? I mean, how do you go to your citizens and say we're going to spend $1.2 million for 12 calls, right? And so that's what we went through. But the other part of this map, and this is where Al and Tolly and several other people kind of came into it, was these are the existing calls. Every one of your communities is growing in a certain way. Some, you know, quicker than others, some in directions than others. So we spent a lot of time with Al, especially, because Milton just added the industrial complex along with the new 4-lane 26, right? I think we all can understand what that's going to do for growth over the next 30 years. Most of the municipalities are aware of developments, residential developments that are planned in certain areas. Now, I'd love to say that we know 30 years out, not a possibility, right? But we know, what, probably, Al, the next 5 to 7 years, roughly, right? And so when we're going through this assessment, we were not only looking at where is your current demand coming from, but where is the future demand going to come from? Because absolutely the worst thing for me to do is be able to say, yep, that's where you need to build a fire station, and then 10 years from now, after 7,000 homes develop in an area that was way the other direction, somebody goes, who was the idiot that put a fire station there? That's what we're trying to prevent, right? So we're looking at both. And several months, right, worth of looking at this. So what we finally get to is, okay, eventually we have to put stations someplace and try to figure it out. Early on in my career, I actually had an opportunity. I spent 5 years in the southwestern suburb of Franklin outside of Milwaukee. Worked out really well for Ruthie's sister because Ruthie's sister ended up marrying my best friend. We introduced him in our garage, actually, one day. But I was on the Franklin Fire Department. Franklin is a very traditional, large, developed township. And that's exactly what it was. It was a township. It was 6 miles by 6 miles, and just absolutely quintessential. We had 4 fire stations to cover just Franklin Township because of the population density, because of the number of calls, right? So, and again, I can pick on Dave this time for the heck of it, right? So if somebody comes to me as a fire chief from the town of Lima and says, how many fire stations do I need to protect Lima in a 5-minute response time, my answer is going to be 4, right? Because that's what you actually need in a township to make sure that your entire township is within a 5-minute response time. Then you kind of look at the calls in Lima, right, and go, yeah, okay, that's not happening, right? So this is where the art comes into it, right? Where are the densities? What can you reasonably cover from the stations that you can reasonably afford? Probably the simplest way, easiest way to say that, right? So we actually started, and it's not in the report because it went away very quickly. We started with a 2-station model. That went away very quickly, right? Because there is no way on God's green earth I could stand up here and tell you that it is sound fire protection, EMS protection, to try to cover 220 square miles with a population of 25,000 people with 2 stations. It's not happening, right? We got to the discussion of 3 stations, and you have the data. We'll look at it here in a second, but we can start to touch on reasonable fire protection, and you can tell I'm very carefully choosing words here, with 3 stations. But at the very top of page 13, so let me get there, there were a couple of comments about that model. So, oops, I got a little ahead of myself. Let me back up in terms of how we did the assessment. National Fire Protection Association, NFPA, is what governs all the standards related to fire services in the United States. The national benchmark is for fire incidents to have 4 personnel arrive on scene within 5 minutes 90% of the time. In an EMS world, it gets a little bit more complicated. The benchmark is for basic life support to arrive within 5 minutes with ALS, so paramedics potentially coming from a little farther away, arriving within 9 minutes. So it's a 2-tiered system. But those are the guidelines we used when we were evaluating this. These are 2 charts that I have used literally all of my life because it answers the question about why does response time matter. When I started in this business, I'm looking around the room, I think I probably outdate any of the other firefighters in terms of age. Yeah, Chris, you haven't been doing this that long, right? 46, yeah. Close, but not, right? When I first started, fire doubled every 60 seconds. So a fire that would start in a wastebasket, 60 seconds later, it was twice the size. It had gotten out of the wastebasket and probably set the desk on fire or whatever it is, right? And then 60 seconds later is now the whole desk and probably the chair next to it, right? What we've gone through in this country in terms of new construction design, truss construction, laminate construction, everything's plastic, which, oh, by the way, is just basically solidified gasoline. Today, fire doubles every 30 seconds. So when we start looking at response times, these are national averages. This is every fire department from Maine to San Diego in terms of averages. If you are not on scene with water starting to intercede on the fire within 6.2 minutes, the fire will extend beyond the room of origin. If you are not on scene with water starting to intercede on the fire within 7.5 minutes, chances are it will be extending to the building next to it. If there's a building next to it, right? I mean, you can kind of factor that one based on how close it is. Response time matters in terms of being able to control the fire, but the thing that this does not highlight for you is the same applies for our ability to save anybody that is either in that room or in that building, right? And Chris will tell you one of the hardest decisions you ever have to make as an incident commander, you pull up, you are told there's somebody trapped in the building and the fire is expanding. What are you going to do with that first crew, right? And the answer really is you're going to go effect the rescue. And we're just going to let the fire burn, right? Because you got to get the person out of there. But the key is 6.2 minutes applies to our ability to rescue somebody that's in that room, or 7.5 minutes to be able to rescue somebody that's in that house. Response time matters in a big way. The other statistic is around heart attacks, breathing, drowning, whatever it may be. This comes from either the Red Cross or the American Heart Association. I should go back and give them the proper credit. An individual who has stopped breathing, has a heart attack, heart is not beating, or you have stopped breathing, your chance of survival goes down 7 to 10% every minute. And most all of you realize issues of starting CPR right away, having an AED available, right? We equip our squad cars with AEDs now, right? So that the quicker that somebody can intercede and keep that person viable until our paramedics can get there, the better chance of survival they are. Something that you folks may not be aware of, it is a statistic that we are unbelievably proud of. Rock County, Wisconsin has the 4th highest survivability rate of cardiac arrests in the country. And it is because of the system we have built, right? Our police officers are trained, they have AEDs. Obviously, drugs is a big issue. Our officers are carrying Narcan, right? We have a tiered response where we get an engine there if there isn't an ambulance close, and then the paramedics get there. The whole system we have built in this county is unbelievably beneficial to our citizens. But it matters, right? If we don't get there within that time frame trying to bring somebody back, you just can't do it. So when we start looking at response times, the whole issue of response time matters. Table 2, which is on page 14, this was the first look at the numbers for each of the municipalities. Obviously, we're not proposing building anything new in Edgerton itself. So Albion, Edgerton, Fulton, really no change if we go with a 3-station model. You can see the numbers. Albion, we have Highway 51 straight up from the station, and then we've got County A, right? So we can get in various places in Albion actually relatively quick, about 22% of the time. Edgerton, except for that far corner, right, which not much we're going to do about that, 99% of all of our calls in the city of Edgerton are within a 5-minute response time. That is phenomenal for a smaller community. Fulton, and throw a river in the middle of it, and it just becomes complicated as hell, right? Because there's just, in some cases, there's no way to get there. Fulton right now, we're at about 2% of our calls within 5 minutes. Town of Harmony, currently about 2%. City of Milton, about 83%. Town of Milton's about 31%. And then Dave and John are well aware, Porter, Sumner, it's a long ways out. And same with Rob and same with Dave. That was the current. You can see the numbers in a 3-station configuration. And so there's clear improvements in Harmony. Dave 75, yeah, exactly. You'll take it, right? 75%. City of Milton would go to 100%. Town of Milton, this is an issue, we'll talk about it here in a second, would actually drop a little bit. Porter and Sumner really don't change. So the 2 areas of concern that were identified with the 3-station model were the percentage of incidents within 5 minutes for the town of Milton would actually decrease, right? So it's kind of hard to recommend something, right, where you're actually going backwards. Now, there were reasons, and Brian can talk very eloquently about them, but the truth was town of Milton would actually go backwards. And then, so now when I do this, let me see how, if I go back up to the chart of all the calls, we basically have Mallwood, Newville, Hillside Road, this area here, 59, so the campgrounds, right? There's a pretty significant predominance of incidents in that region. And there's lots of numbers in the report that you can look at. 62% of all of the town of Fulton's calls happen in the Newville region. Newville, Mallwood, just collectively, right? Brian shared with me a statistic that I had no concept of until he shared it with me. 30+% of all of the town of Milton's population lives in Mallwood. And obviously that drives activity, right? So as we were looking at this, right, this is an area of concern for us, right? We are not moving the downtown Edgerton Fire Station. It is providing outstanding coverage for the city of Edgerton. It's providing reasonably good coverage for the town of Albion. not great coverage, right? But we got to get out to Porter and up to Sumner. We can't move that building. It's in the right spot. It's a good compliment to John and the team years and years and years ago, right? That figured out where to put that building. It is in the right spot. And then when you throw in there the development, and you guys, all you got to do is drive up Hillside Road, and you'll understand the word development. And we're aware of a couple of other projects that are rather substantial out in that region. So that issue was a concern. So one of the questions was, what do we do about it? So we actually looked at a 4-station model. It is illustrative, right? Because buildings are expensive, right? I'm not going to stand up here and tell you we got to just do this, right? Because buildings are expensive. But at some point in the future, regardless of how deep we want to put our heads in the sand, we're going to have to do something about Mallwood, Newville, Hillside Road, right? There's no way around that, right? So then we get into this discussion, which we won't do tonight, but you get into the discussion of, well, you just do it all at once, right? You bid a couple of projects, you probably get a nice discount for doing it all at once, or do you want to wait a few years? And that's a discussion for a different meeting, right? But statistically then, the 4-station model, Town of Albion goes from 22% up to 29%, right? Because we pick up the Hillside Road corridor up into Albion and Highwood, and where did Kate go? Right, so there's some good advantage there. Edgerton stays at 99, doesn't change. Fulton goes from 2% to 50%. That's a quantum jump, and obviously as a fire chief, that's something that says a lot. Harmony goes from 2% to 17%. Johnstown, it's 0, it stays 0, but the one thing, we ran a lot of studies on Johnstown, because seriously, Rob and I spent a lot of time trying to figure out what we could do about that area down there. But in the 4-station configuration, every call in Johnstown town, the town of Johnstown, would improve by at least 6 minutes. Can't get him to the 5-minute window, right? But every call in Johnstown that we knew about would improve by at least 6 minutes. We took that as something probably worth, this is going to work. Lima, 75, kind of stayed the same. City of Milton would go to 100%, and rightfully so, right, based on where those two buildings are. They were very carefully, the spots were very carefully picked. Town of Milton would go from 31 to 48%. And then Porter and Sumner, again, we're not proposing to build anything west. So that gives you the response time data. Depth of response, this is one we could talk about all night long because it's kind of an esoteric thing, but a working fire, so a residential fire, a commercial fire, the national standard is to have 14 people on scene within 9 minutes. And there's all sorts of reasons why that's important, because the worst thing as a fire chief to ever do is send an attack crew through a door of a working structure fire and you can't even hear the next unit coming, right? Because that's their backup. And if right? So depth is unbelievably important from a safety perspective and from an operational perspective. You'll see in a little while that this model, if we were to go forward with it, has good improvement in depth as well. But the other thing I was going to point out, oops, that was in the last page, 207 emergency responses in the Mallwood, Fulton region in 2020. 207 incidents out there. So, again, that's kind of why that whole thing came up. All right, we talked about the depth of response. Oop, there it is. So this is on page 16, I'm going to guess. Yep, this is on page 16. Right now today, depending on whether it's daytime or nighttime, Milton is much more stable, actually, than than Edgerton at this point. We have more people in our buildings during the day. We have less people in our buildings at night. Milton's a little bit more stable. They have a consistent force, or they try to, right? Plus or minus people not being available, but they have a consistent force in the station. So right now today, between the two of us, we have between 7 and 11 people in the building. What that basically means is there is no fire that either of us go to today where we don't need mutual aid to hit that 15 benchmark. The model that's proposed by the petitioners, no change in Edgerton, right? We're staying with our current structure, but with the model that's proposed by Milton, we'd have 11 to 16 people available depending on the time of day. So at least half of the day, we would be able to hit that 15 benchmark, 14 or 15 benchmark with our own personnel. We're still going to have mutual aid coming, right? But at least you get them there quicker so that you don't have to worry about sending a crew in the building and not being able to hear that second truck coming. We looked at apparatus. We looked at equipment. I need to just thank Jeremy and Chris and Pete and Rob. We worked hard at trying to do a complete assessment on the existing equipment, the existing apparatus, looked at it in terms of its life, because obviously what we were looking for was, would this actually cause then a huge impact in our capital improvement plan over the next 15 years, right? If all of a sudden there's 5 trucks that have to be replaced in the next 2 years, people are going to come back and go, whoa, you guys didn't look at that very well, did you? So we have. We've looked at it. We've looked at how we would slot it in. The existing Edgerton board knows we plan our capital projects out 20 years, plus or minus something breaking, right? But we have a pretty good plan as to where everything falls. We slotted the Milton equipment in there. And again, you'll see at the end of this discussion, but there's nothing there that raised any red flags whatsoever. Page 19 is where I'm aiming next. So the bottom line on the operational issues were, this would enable the district to provide sound and improved levels of fire and EMS protection to the new areas. It would actually enhance the soundness of the level of fire and EMS protection for the current district areas. It would dramatically improve and enhance the district's ability to deliver a consistent level of service with a larger labor pool of both full-time and paid-on-call, paid-on-premise personnel. Right now today, and you know, without trying to scare anybody, there are days when Chris and Jenny are pulling their hair out trying to figure out how to have enough people in the Milton station. And then there are days last Saturday, and they were not all being paid, so don't take this the wrong way, but I walked into our station last Saturday. I couldn't get in the door. There was 17 people in the station. Now, if the tones had gone off, I'd have been a little scared, because you really don't want all of that stuff arriving at the same time. That's the worst thing in the world to have happen. But there are days when we've got extra people over here and we need somebody over there, or vice versa, right? So the larger labor pool would allow us to be able to make sure there was consistent levels of staffing. And with that level of staffing on duty, we've got an NFPA compliant response heading out the door. So obviously that, from an operational standpoint, is green. Then you get into the financial. We spent a lot of time obviously digging into the finances of this to make sure that we weren't doing something that was fiscally irresponsible. You can read most of it. Again, I highlighted in red, at least on the slides, this issue of everybody understands we're going to manage the finances of this independent between the two, whether we call them zones or divisions or whatever we call them, until we can get them consistent with each other. So that there's no cross subsidies, and that's all that really says. John, who I guess officially is my boss, basically, right? Kind of that way, right? John kept asking me this question for roughly, 4 months? And I wouldn't give him a number. We did a lot of looking at the finances of it, a lot of modeling, a lot of what ifs. There appears to be, and obviously these are all estimates, right? I mean, we all kind of get that, right? But there's been a lot of work that goes into this. There's about $409,000 in what we refer to as shared or common costs. Those things that right now either two departments are both paying for or would need to pay for, that if you actually just put them together, now you've got 10 or 11 communities paying for those shared costs instead of 5 communities each paying for all of them, right? You guys, it's a pretty simple math equation. That is the financial assessment of this. It would be inappropriate for me to say that that's $409,000 that you can just put in your pocket, right? Because obviously a bigger district is going to require a couple extra layers, and not layers, but a couple of additional management structure that we don't have, right? We have one division chief today. We'd need at least 2, right? So we will eat up some of that shared cost, right? I mean, I'm just being blatantly honest. But there is an element of that shared cost that actually becomes unassigned at this point. And some of our financial people have seen that number. I'm kind of leery of actually putting it out there. But there is savings. Even if we do reuse a lot of the shared costs, there is savings. And again, some people heard this last night. That is part of what we're hoping we could put towards that salary differential and some of those other problems we're trying to wrestle with. So you have the numbers there. The one impact, so Ramona, you probably read this one and you highlighted it before I highlighted it. In the year if, the shock collar was starting to blink, if we were to do this, in the year that we would do it, the new district would not qualify, as we understand it, under the thresholds as set in the CPI +2 rules in the administrative code. Our total expense and debt would increase beyond what the threshold would allow. So in the year that we would do this, to the degree we understand it, we would not qualify for CPI +2 if your municipality uses it. Unless we can file for an exemption. We did a similar assessment on the capital budget. Much smaller number. There's about $7,500 worth of shared capital investment that we could probably save. So the bottom line on the financials, staff finds financially the commitments made by the petitioners, if funded by the petitioners at the proposed level. And I know both Brian and Anissa talked about the referendum issue and, you know, everything that they would have to go through to make sure that we actually do that. But the assumption is if those thresholds are met, there is sufficient, it is sufficient to provide the level of service that's described. In other words, it's funded, right? They're not proposing that they want a level of service that's not funded. It would generate, it's interesting. That one did not get updated. There's a typo in there. Because that 179 and 200,000 should actually be the 209 and the larger number. So I apologize for missing that one. Would generate about 7,500 in capital savings, all of which in essence would ease some of the pressure that we're both facing on our operating budget. It does add some additional staff that helps us from a staffing perspective. And the one thing we built in here was increased wages to try to cut down on us being cherry-picked by everybody else for highly trained staff. So that's already in these numbers. When we get to governance, as I said at the very beginning, and I think this paragraph tries to talk to it, the simple answer about governance is we have an IGA today. It'll probably take a couple of attorneys an hour or two just to tweak it and add in the additional municipalities. So literally from a governance perspective, it would be easy, but what we've all recognized is that the model that works for 5 municipalities, if that grows to 11, and heaven only knows if it grows to 15 over time, right? If this model that we're putting together has the potential to grow over time, the current structure, it just kind of, it's a lot of people at a table trying to get something done, right? I mean, you know, imagine your city council with 22 members on, you know, sitting at the council table. So what we've realized is, yes, the basic structure of the IGA is going to be pretty simple to put together, but we need to spend some serious time thinking through a governance structure that is lean enough that it'll work for a much bigger organization. The other thing that we recognize is that some of our municipalities are growing quicker than they can probably keep up with, AKA everything east of Highway 26 along Highway 59 in Milton, right? The city of Milton is going to be experiencing dramatic growth over the next 5 to 10 years. Probably not the same case in Johnstown, picking on Rob again, right? Although I keep telling him he's got great land for about 10,000 homes out there. So the other thing that we've got to look at very seriously is how do we create a governance structure that allows communities that are growing and their needs may grow greater than some of the other communities, and be able to do that all within the district structure, and again, not create cross subsidies. So this is the area, you probably noticed it in the report. The bottom line from staff was not in green, it was in yellow in the report, and it just basically says we got to spend some time working on this one. We got to get it right. It is not insurmountable. Several people in this room know last year when I went to the International Fire Chiefs Conference, I actually sought out representatives from 3 or 4 very large districts across the country. And I sat down with those guys and gals, and we spent a lot of time talking about what does your governance structure look like? What do you like about it? What works? What doesn't work? How would you do it? If you got a chance to do it differently, same question we asked, you know, when we were building our house, right? If we like to give an idea, we'd ask the person, what would you do differently, right? We have all that information. Probably the model that we're looking at is from a district called the United Fire Authority in Salt Lake City, Utah. It's a 27 municipality district. It is not Salt Lake City itself, but it is everything all the way around Salt Lake City. The largest of their suburban communities has a population of about 24,000 people, so a reasonably moderate-sized, you know, city. The smallest of their jurisdictions is a township with 423 people. They have a multi-tiered governance structure. That district has existed, I believe, for like 18 years, and the people that I talked to said nobody's really ever complained. It works well, it's efficient, it allows those communities that are growing to be able to meet their growth needs, and it allows those communities that are not to have to, you know, get sucked along with something they don't want to be part of. So we have at least that model, and we have a couple others that over the next couple of months, that's probably the area that we would be spending the most amount of time trying to figure out how to get right. So that's the governance. Staff recommendation. Oops. There's a lot of words there, and you can read them all. You don't need me to read them. But basically, it says staff finds that properly integrated, right? So it basically comes down to if we do this right, with the commitments made by the petitioning entities, the expansion of the district as proposed will provide improved level, improved soundness of fire and emergency medical to the proposed new areas, while also improving the level to our existing municipalities. That's kind of the bottom line. How far ahead of myself did I get? Okay. The balance of the document then goes through all of the Ts and Cs of the existing agreement, and we identified all the sections in the existing agreement that we'd have to look at, just to make sure that we've addressed everything. Some of the simplest of them, just as a point of reference, when the district was originally formed, it was a fire district. There was futuristic language put in there that made reference to contracting for EMS service, and I think that was the day, right, John? You guys were contracting for EMS service. There's just some cleanup stuff, right? We're now a fire and EMS district, so there's a whole bunch of language in there that can probably come out and kind of clean it up, right? So it'd be that kind of stuff. You all have all of these appendices to look at, and then you have a few more. You have the existing 1992 district agreement. It's only been amended 3 times through the years, and relatively minor amendments. Minor in terms of the number of words. I think the board, some members of the board would tell you some of them were very emotional. Around 2% dues and a few things. But basically, you have the existing agreement in Appendix 1. You have what is the current agreement, so all of the amendments that have happened over the last 30 years in Appendix 2. There's very few changes. Appendix 3 is the full petition that was filed by the petitioning municipalities. I'm sorry. Appendix 3 was the procedure on what they had to do. Appendix 4 is the actual petition. Appendix 5, the petitioning municipalities, there are costs involved in this. For those who haven't figured that out, they've incurred a fair amount of cost, right, in terms of engineering expense and work that's been done on the design of the potential stations, just in terms of their legal costs and all that kind of stuff. There are 2 entities that own the current Milton Fire Department. There are 5 entities involved in it. So they sat down and they developed an intergovernmental agreement amongst themselves for how all of that financial interaction between the 5 of them, totally independent with the current district or anything that would be going forward, but how are they going to manage all the financial true-ups and who owes who what and who owns what assets, that kind of stuff. That's all. You have a copy of it. It does not affect us from the current existing Edgerton Fire Protection District at all, but you have a copy of it so you can see the agreement they've reached among themselves. Appendix 6 are a sampling of all the maps. If we gave them all to you, Tali, what would we be looking? 40, 50 pages? At least. But you have some of the key maps that are in there. And then since this document was written, there's one other document that has been created. It is an MOU between the 5 petitioning municipalities and the district itself that facilitates moving forward with negotiations. And so a copy of that is also in your spiral bound document. And then in the district board members' binders, they have bigger binders, there's room for the draft of the IGA and that kind of stuff, which we haven't even started on yet. I don't believe there is anything in the maps that I haven't already touched on, so I'm going to kind of stop there. So Candy and Ruth, if I can have my 2 Vannas come forward. We've got microphone. Oops, I'm sorry. I realize I can't move. Sorry, Anga. We have microphones. The only real reason the microphones are important is that in the live streaming, the people who are watching this or the recording that people will watch, nothing we say, if we don't say it into one of these microphones, actually goes out on the live stream. So we're at that point where, what do you got for questions? I really did overwhelm them, didn't I? Don?
Randy, did you say the Department of Revenue would have to approve that +2?
So that's probably a lunch out at Anchor. We can talk about it.
Well, I can get you Peter Barca at a meeting if you want to set that up as soon as possible.
I'm looking right at Ramona. Yes,
And
Ramona and I would love to talk to you afterwards. Yes.
Yes, we'll set that up, and I'll get him out there within a few weeks.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. I mean, literally, and again, I'm being a little fortuitous, but it's exactly what Don has been doing for us throughout this whole process. As we've run into roadblocks or little gaps or questions, literally, he's gotten us to department heads in the matter of minutes. So, thank you. I mean, I know I couldn't have done that good a job. Either that or everybody wants a spotted cow. I'm good with that one. We're not going to make you stay, right?
Ruth.
Oops. Ruthie? To your right. Yep.
What occurs if the referendum does not pass, or if it passes in the city and doesn't pass in the township?
Strangely enough, we knew that question was coming. We'd have probably planted it if it didn't come out.
All right, so we've all committed to finding a sustainable model. And if we run into a roadblock with funding, we still have to provide service. We do have a department already that is functioning. It provides good service, but we believe it's not sustainable and is not the most efficient model long-term. And that's a problem because it's a challenge today, and it will become a bigger challenge as years come by. But we do have a station, we do have service functioning, and it would continue, but it would not be the sustainable model. So that's the best answer I can give you. I can't say that, maybe that municipality that couldn't find levy dollars that the electors chose to give indefinitely or pay for these investments, that they could still choose to go out and borrow and find out in future years how they resolve that debt. But that's just something we have to deal with at that point. We have to look at the best model we have today and try to make it work, and have to fall back on something else if we cannot put this together. And that's an unknown at this point. Pardon?
Will this be on during November?
November.
We're anticipating a November referendum for both the town of Milton and the city of Milton. We're working with a consultant on that right now to put those questions there on the referendum or the election cycle in November. Yes. And the other towns are looking at other funding models and avenues.
I think it's important on the referendum idea that it not just be Milton, the city of Milton, and the town of Milton. I think it would be important for not just the 5 municipalities that have petitioned, but also the other 5 municipalities that we work all together to try to get this passed, because it is going to help everybody. And I would like to see if somebody has a question, for example, that goes to Porter Township and asks something about, what's going to happen if this doesn't go through. I would like them to be able to provide the same answer as what the town of Milton or the town of Harmony would answer. So I would hope that we could all work together on trying to get this referendum, even though the town of Harmony doesn't have to have a referendum, but we need to work together on that. And we also, Don was just saying that we have to convince the people that, or make them aware that if we don't get this passed, it's going to cost them more money in the long run. So it would be wise for them to choose it, yeah, for the service. So, okay.
And that is a great question, and it's come up, I think, in probably a dozen other meetings, right? Because it's kind of the first one that really kind of hits you. The way I've always answered it is bringing the 11 jurisdictions together under a single district is one issue. The size of that new district is what the referendum dictates. You know, can we actually reach the vision that we're trying to get to right away, or does that take a little longer? But that's kind of totally independent of, does it make sense to do this as 11 municipalities working together versus, you know, 2 groups of 5? Kind of the way I've looked at it. The only other big question that was out there was, how in the world are you going to provide fire protection to Johnstown from a station in Edgerton? But we already answered that one. So or that, we all got that question right in the early days. And I think, you know, it was just kind of, no, we're not going to try to do it out of one station. I think just about everybody in the room either has or knows somebody that has both my cell phone, my email address, my wife's cell phone, my wife's email address. If there are questions that any of you have individually and you want to spend time, or there's things that you think we missed, because there's got to be, right? This is one of the most complicated things that your municipalities can go through. Just reach out. I mean, we have tried to jump on every question, much like, you know, Don and the things that came up along the way, and all of a sudden Don went and got us some department head who didn't know why he was going someplace, and he just brought him in a room, and we resolved it. Thank you. Don't hesitate to reach out. I mean, we really are trying to answer everybody's questions. More importantly, if there's things that you think we missed, or a nuance of something that you're like, hey, wait a minute, that's just not going to work, right? I mean, let us know, right? Because the only, and I've had this conversation, I think, with Evan 800 times, right? Keep asking the questions. Just keep asking the questions, because the more questions we get, the more we have to think through what did we miss, right? Or you know, did we look at it this way versus that way? Any other questions before I do the kind of the 2-minute wrap-up? Okay. I said this to literally every individual, either individually or as a group, that I met with early on in this process. There is no more critical decision than you folks are going to make in your political career than fire and emergency medical services protection for your communities. I mean, there's a lot of things. Roads, right? I mean, we can talk about roads for the next 2 hours, right? We can talk about sewers, and we can talk about water pipes and lead pipes and all that kind of stuff. But at the end of the day, law enforcement, fire, and EMS is literally one of the most critical decisions you're going to make. When we started this process, and Brian heard it out of my mouth from the very first time we met, if we're going to go down this path, we're going to get it right. We're trying to do something here to carry these 11 communities for the next 50 years. We can probably guarantee the next 20 pretty accurately, right? The next 20 after that are a little grayer, right? But we are really trying to get this right so that, and Brian keeps touching on it, the sustainability of this model. We're trying to do something here. It is costly. It is going to be painful, right? This is not free, right? But we're trying to do something that your municipalities don't really have to worry about this for about 25 or 30 more years. Because a lot of us will still be on this, or some of us will still be on this earth 20 years from now. I don't want the person who's the Edgerton Fire Chief 20 years from now going, what the hell were you thinking? Right? Trying to do it right. So I commend you for the courage to be willing to look at this, for the time that you've put into it. Don't hesitate to reach out if we've missed anything or you have any comments. I sincerely appreciate the time you spent this evening. Time is valuable, and we do understand that. Again, Paul, thank you very much. Inga, thank you very much for all of your efforts. Have a good evening. And Two Brothers serves for another 20 minutes.